Today, I'd like to share with us ideas and thoughts on how to create wealth and get rich even in imperfect systems. And I think this is going to resonate with people who work in some sort of apprenticeship model that has a delayed gratification component to it. So think professions like law, consulting, investment banking, where you have someone who's at the top of the food chain, managing director or partner of some sort, and then you are at the early stages, in the early stages of your career. You're at the beginning stages, and a lot of that work, once that partner has won the business, is done by you. So the technical grunt, really greedy work is what you're doing. But when the deal finally closes, or when the firm finally gets paid, the person at the top gets a disproportionate share of that versus you still get paid nicely. But the thought here is this, is that even within paid employment situations where there are maybe imperfect systems, and it really just isn't limited to paid employment. You could be an entrepreneur and you have a market system that is very competitive. You have to deal with that. Or you're in a situation where you have corporate hierarchies and you have to deal with that, or there are unequal power dynamics. What I'm sharing with you is very relevant. And the story I'd be drawing on today is the Jacob and Laban story. And this is really a continuation of the series that I had started. And it's an ongoing part of this series where we're looking at different stories in the Bible, and we're trying to draw out ideas that would help with creating wealth, with leadership, and with getting success in different areas of life. I like to say this, and I think it's important to keep on repeating it so we understand this. I honor the Bible and I honor the integrity of the word and what the stories in there are trying to do for us and tell us and teach us about life and relationship with God and the life that we live in today. So this isn't intended for us to get some sort of prescriptive moral behavior, because that's not what these stories are about. As a matter of fact, a lot of the characters that we have been drawing and the stories where we've been drawing ideas from, these characters and some of their processes have actually been very, very deeply flawed. And I want to acknowledge that. So this is not necessarily saying that because something is descriptive, then it is necessarily prescriptive for your life. What I'm trying to do in this series is to see how has God dealt with his people and still had his agenda prevail despite the imperfections in the system and despite the flaws in human behavior. But how can we read these characters in light of their best behavior, their best interactions with God, and see how we can draw wisdom and knowledge for our lives, and how that helps us with success, making progress in our lives and in our situation as well. So let me set up the context here. If you read from Genesis chapter 27 all the way to chapter 29, we see the story of Jacob in there. It really laser focuses on him in that moment, and it's sort of a pivotal moment in his life, but it's a very long text, so we're not going to read that. I'm just going to give you a very quick summary and set it up for you. So the story in chapter 26 talks about Isaac being one of the patriarchs of old. And continuing that story, the Bible already tells us that Isaac was a wealthy and a rich person in chapter 26. In fact, it says that he had men servants, maid servants, he had flocks, he had camels, and so on and so forth. The Bible says, in fact, he was so rich because God had blessed him to the point he was so rich, he was richer than everyone that was around him. And the tribes and the nations, the Philistines in this case, they envied him because of how much wealth and how much influence he had. And then it goes on in chapter 27. And then we then see the story of how he's in his old age and he is about to pass on something, right? An inheritance to his children. So specifically, he calls one of his two sons Esau. He had two sons. The first was Esau, the other was Jacob. He calls Esau. He says, look, why don't you go out? You're a man of the field. Get me game that I like and prepare it for me. Venison is what some renditions call it. And prepare for me a stew that I really enjoy so that I can bless you. And something that's particularly interesting in that narrative setup is that, one, it sort of gives us the pretext of this idea of passing on an inheritance, or his wealth, right? Because the preceding story tells us how much he has in Genesis chapter 26. And there's this concept of the double portion. And what happens in the culture back then is, for the very firstborn, this is the one through whom the father would be passing his legacy. He'd get, when you divide the wealth into, that first half goes to that firstborn, who is going to be the one who is effectively the next patriarch of that family. And then the rest of it is divided across everyone else, including that individual who got the first portion. So that's called a double portion. But what's particularly interesting in this story is that Isaac was more concerned about passing on the blessing to his son. Story focuses less on the actual material inheritance. And I think that in and of itself is the very first principle, is the recognition of the fact that the blessing is the true source of wealth and riches in the life of a person. We see this idea in Genesis chapter 1. Bible tells us that after God had created humanity in the garden, he says that he blesses them, says to them, be fruitful. So he blessed them by saying to them, be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue the earth, and have dominion. So in essence, productivity is a blessing. It's a commandment of the blessing. The ability to take that which is raw, that which has no form in and of itself, and to assert your will over that thing and bring beauty out of it such that it benefits another is a blessing. Your ability to have influence is a product of the blessing. And all of that was given as a commandment, couched in this language of blessing to humanity. We also see in the book of Deuteronomy, it tells us that in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 18, Moses is talking to the people. He's effectively giving them quote unquote locker room talk before they enter into the promised land. And he says to them that you will remember the Lord Yahweh, because it is him that has given you the ability to get wealth. So the ability to get wealth is in essence that blessing we see in Genesis chapter 12. This is the first patriarch, Abraham. We also see in there that God blessed him, and that blessing has with it the connotations of influence, of wealth, of increase, of prosperity, of security, even for that individual. So Isaac understands this concept. So when he's calling his son Esau to go prepare something for him so that he can bless him, in essence, he's saying that I understand that this blessing, Proverbs 10:22 says the blessing of the Lord, it makes rich without adding sorrow. That's what has made me rich. I'm about to give you that thing and transfer it over to you in a manner that would cause you to be rich as well. I'm also going to give you some possessions, but that's less important in this whole situation. It's the blessing that is the paramount thing that then will cause that wealth. Now, in a preceding story, we see a situation where Esau had actually traded his birthright, right, for a porridge that Jacob had made. The mother, they're both the twins, but the mother of the two of them, Rebecca, heard that the father wanted to bless Esau. She calls Jacob. Maybe Jacob was the favorite son. Maybe she had heard about this story where they had exchanged birthrights for the porridge that Jacob had made. So then she tells him, like, look, why don't you do this? Why don't you go out, go grab an animal. I'll prepare it for you. Your dad likes my cooking. I'll prepare it for you. Put some fur around yourself. And then she just kind of like manipulates the situation such that Jacob can actually receive the blessing. And at that point in time, Isaac is old, he's blind, he can't really see, so he's trusting his other senses to discern who it was. And so Jacob comes, he eats the meal, and then ultimately proclaims that blessing on Jacob himself. Esau then finally had received the instruction, comes in with everything, and he's like, Isaac's confused. It's like, wait, what happened here? I thought I had already blessed you. And Esau goes like, no, that wasn't me. I just came back. I just did all the work. I mean, it's a lot of work to go out here and to hunt this game and to prepare it and do all of that for you. Long story short, they figure out what's going on. Jacob had received the blessing. Esau is crying about it. It's like, you got to bless me as well. Like, they understood the importance of that blessing. Ultimately, Rebecca, the mother of the two sons, tells Jacob, look, it's getting to be a messy situation. Why don't you move away, because I don't want to see any sort of rivalry that ends up in the loss of your life. Go to my kinsman, go look for my brother Laban, hang out with him. Once your brother has cooled down and his anger has subsided, I'll send for you. You can come back. Jacob comes back, says goodbye to the family. Isaac blesses him again, tells him about how wealthy he'd be, how much of a person of influence would be, how fruitful he'll be. And then that's in Genesis chapter 28, the first 2-3 verses. And then he goes out there, and then he goes to his mother's hometown, sees Laban there. And then Laban takes him in, asks him about look, yeah, we're family. Yeah, I'm just not going to let you work for me for free. You just tell me what it is that you want. And then he's like, well, I want Rachel, your wife. I'm going to work for you for 7 years. But at the end of these 7 years, give me Rachel, one of your daughters. Sorry, not your wife. As a wife, I want Rachel. She's your daughter. Give her to me. You know, Laban goes, yeah, that's sounds good to me, bro. And so that happens. He does the 7 years, but then he tricks him, gives him Leah, which is the older daughter. And as the story suggests, the less pretty one, right? Rachel was characterized as being more beautiful in this story. So he was tricked, had a good time on the night of the wedding. I don't know how drunk you're going to be, but you actually don't know what's happening. But that happens, and then he's made to work another 7 years so he can actually get Rachel. But then on top of that, it so happens that Laban's prospering, right? Because he's working for Laban. He's herding Laban's livestock. It's multiplying. It's increasing. Laban's like continuing to play all these tricks on him up until the point where he ultimately gets into a position where he's able to recover a lot of that wealth and steps out from that situation and goes away with his family. Again, the story could get, it's pretty lengthy, right? So I'd encourage you to read it, but that's the general setup in that story. Now, a few things that it's important for us to understand, because when Jacob is finally returning back home, he's saying some things, right? And he talks about how when he left his father and his mother's house, his family, that he didn't have anything. So he was undercapitalized. He started out from the ground. He started out from the bottom. And that could be a lot of people who are watching this video. Maybe you feel like, I'm not coming from family money. I'm not coming from a place of privilege. That really doesn't matter. Like, there's a few things I've already shared in this story, starting with the fact that the blessing is the force that actually helps with creating wealth in your life, with helping you to get rich in your life. So he starts out undercapitalized, right? He doesn't have any control. He doesn't have any assets other than that blessing that had been released upon him at the time when he was leaving the house, right? And that's the situation that he was operated in. Then he gets into a situation where he enters a system that is unfair. He enters a system that is effectively treating him wrongly. Laban had the power. Laban had the asset. Laban had the leverage. Laban had the control. Laban had the contract. And for a lot of people who maybe you're coming from a place without means, you're starting from the bottom, you're entering into systems like that, and you feel like there's disproportionate power, there's information asymmetry, you're feeling like you don't have the leverage, you feel like it's an unfair circumstance, you feel like the rules keep shifting and changing and so on and so forth, like the goalpost keeps moving, and it's like, how do I get ahead in that particular situation? This is similar to exactly the types of situation that Jacob was in, but he ultimately was able to come out on top. Now, let's walk through a few things here, right? One of the things that you need to understand is that for a lot of people, when they get into a situation like I've described, a system, a structure, a corporate organization where you don't have power, you don't have leverage, the dynamics seem unfair, it feels like the goal keeps changing. The instinctive reaction for a lot of people is to want to remove themselves from that situation. I cannot tell you the number of times I'm talking to people, I'm counseling people, and we're talking about this, and the default is like, you know what? They pissed me off. I'm going to go out. I'm going to start looking for another job. Like, know your worth, yada, yada, yada. By the way, no one should be maltreated. That's not the point, and that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not saying just stay in a situation where you're unfairly treated, you're being abused or anything like that. But I'm trying to show you here that even in that situation, you have to understand that there's precedent for us to see that you can still come out ahead in that particular situation. There's a principle therein, and that's what I'm trying to shed light for us to see. Because I've been there. I cannot tell you the number of different jobs that I've been at where I felt unfairly treated. Yeah, maybe it was my incompetence, right? Yes, that's possible. But you ask yourself the question, did someone not see my potential? was it just easier to treat me as a number and just cut me out of that situation and just, remove me and say, yep, not worth it, not performing. I'm not going to spend any time on this individual versus like recognizing that, okay, this is a hire. I can invest in this particular person and I can train them up and I can help them get up the curve if it was truly a performance situation. And that's what I'm trying to say, that there are different mentalities in different organizations around how you treat resources and how you treat people, right? So what I'm saying is that in the midst of that situation, we see a story where there was an outcome that could still be positive. And that's what I'm trying to dive right into over here. So he goes in here, and a lot of people, when they try to remove themselves, what they say is like, well, I'm going to go start my own business. Like, be your own boss. No one's going to tell me what to do. You're not going to get rich working for someone. And look, this all of that sentiment, I totally understand. But there's really something about the stability of a job, of paid employment, such that you can take that capital. You don't have any capital right now, but you can take that capital from paid employment and then you can start diverting that into ownership of other assets that would help you get ahead in life. So yes, getting paid in and of itself may or may not make you rich. Definitely, you're not necessarily capturing the full value that you offer by working in the context of an organization. But number one, it doesn't mean you should stop creating value. And it doesn't mean you should not deliver value above what you're being paid for. And that's one of the mindset that you have to understand. And we're going to speak about today. But also does not mean that you can't get ahead and you can't get rich in that particular situation. And that's what I'm talking about. So what did Jacob do? When he got into that situation, one thing he had on him was the blessing, and at least he had a consciousness of that blessing. But even within that system that was unfair, what he started doing, he started building skills. He started learning how to herd animals as well, how to manage livestock. So he started deepening his industry knowledge in that particular situation, refining his skills, deepening his industry knowledge. And then he started forming a reputation, right? Because there's a part in that story where Laban comes to him and says, look, man, I've figured this out by divination. I've consulted like mediums and we figured out that the success that I'm enjoying is because of you. So let me strike up a deal with you that keeps you with me so that we can all benefit, right? You win, I win, we all win. And maybe you're in an organization where sometimes that happens. You feel like, you know what? I'm the one who's really driving performance of my team. I'm the one who's really causing things to work. Rather than have this sense of pride and entitlement, you have to realize that what I'm teaching you here, how to get ahead and how to be successful and create wealth in imperfect systems, not only requires strategy, it also requires faith. It requires a sense of purpose. It also requires divine alignment, right? So we're not going to step into trying to manipulate the situation in our own will because we're operating in faith. We're operating under a different set of rules where we're putting our trust and our hope and our confidence in God. And we're holding on to him and looking onto him to help us navigate what is an otherwise challenging situation and give us direction. So the alignment and the sense of purpose in what it is that I'm doing is more important than my own personal desires and my own feelings in that particular situation. So he's building skills. He's dipped in his industry knowledge in that situation. He's developing a reputation. He's getting really good at what he's doing such that folks around him in that system begin to understand that, man, you know what? Maybe we misread that guy. There's a lot of potential in that guy. Now his name is like going into different corners. But then the other thing is he's also becoming more strategic. He's recognizing patterns. He's seeing how things are happening. He has gone into this place where he has reached the level of expertise where it's almost like he's in flow state, like he's competent unconsciously, right? Because he sees all these different pieces and he knows how they work. When you're starting off and you're in a situation and in an organization where it feels like, again, there's asymmetry, there's a power imbalance, there's leverage on the other side that you don't have, that's exactly what you should be doing. That's the very first point. Begin to develop yourself, develop your skill set, get a deeper sense of your understanding of that industry. Start building a reputation for yourself. Get to the place of competency that's beyond the level that you're at. A lot of people say things like, man, they're not paying me enough for the work that I'm doing. And that's the wrong. If you're going to be rich, you cannot have that mindset. Your mindset ought to be, how do I deliver more value? So I'll use myself as an example, right? So I'm a director in my organization. When I set goals for myself for performance, I'm not measuring myself. I'm not trying to do just enough at the director level. I'm trying to understand, what do managing directors do? What's the goal for them? How do I start practicing and hitting the target of managing directors right now? I want to deliver more than is expected of me. Some people may recognize it. Some people may not recognize it, but that should not then keep me. And because I've seen this happen. It's like, oh man, I worked so hard. I did so much, but no one even recognized it. You know what? Next day, I'm not even going to try my best. Now, you're going to keep doing and working to deliver value above where you're at. That's your very first focus, right? And that's where you need to start. The other thing that we see in this situation, right, is how Jacob put faith into action. Faith in this context, because I talked about faith does not replace you being strategic. Faith, on the other hand, it heightens your senses. It sharpens your strategic inclinations. Because what had happened in this particular situation was that Laban had been changing Jacob's wages. He's been moving the goalposts all the while, but Jacob's watching the situation. He understands that he's been unfairly treated. But then he recognizes a moment when the power scale tilts, when Laban needs him more than he needs Laban. And he then is able to negotiate a situation that is beneficial for him. So he's very strategic. So in the midst of that situation that you may be in, whether that's a competitive market, whether that's a situation where there's information asymmetry, where there's a power imbalance, where you don't control the assets yet, right? Or you don't have ownership yet, you're still being strategic. Because of all the things we talked about in the previous point, you're still trusting, you're still believing, you're still expecting, and your faith is sharpening your sense of strategy. Your faith is helping you with being able to recognize patterns and recognize those patterns very well. Your faith is sharpening your sense of thought, your thinking, right? So all of a sudden, someone then comes to you and presents an idea to you and is like, hey man, because you've developed a reputation, because you developed a level of competency that's beyond the average person, because your demonstration of that competency is at a level where you're, unconscious in how you are expressing it, somebody recognizes that and is like, look, why don't I set up a deal with you? Why don't we go into partnership of some sort? And that's exactly what Laban said in the story. So it's in Genesis chapter 30, verse 27. It says, but Laban said to him, if it pleases you at all, stay with me. It says, I have determined by divination that Yahweh has blessed me on your account. So it's because of you I have been blessed. That's exactly what he says. So he sees that as an opportunity. And then Laban says, tell me what you want, right? And that's when Jacob then negotiates something that favors him. So those opportunities would present themselves to you. And you'd understand that it's a divine moment. It's an opportune moment. And that's the moment that you're supposed to then take advantage of. Whether that's in a competitive market or that's within the context of an organization, it might be equity discussions, it might be salary negotiations, performance-based compensations, profit splits, and so on and so forth. The whole point here is because you are, again, don't forget, you're not necessarily just exploiting the situation for the sake of exploiting the situation. You've been delivering value all these years. You've been delivering above and beyond all this while. Maybe the goalpost has been moving in that organization for you multiple times. You've been in this sort of really unfair disadvantage in that particular context, but then the opportunity presents itself. And what happens is that it is ultimately God who is shifting and balancing the scales for life. There's something that happens to me. This is just a personal example. In the course of my work, I've been in situations where people close to me would be like, man, that is so unfair. I cannot believe this person did that to you. I can't believe that's happening to you. I'm really sorry. You should fight. You should let them know. And you know what my mindset is? It's never a mindset of, I can't believe they did that to me. I'm just going to remove myself from this situation. I can't believe they did that to me. I'm not even going to work as hard. I can't believe they did that to me. I'm not going to deliver excellence anymore. My mentality is always that no human being has the power to determine the outcomes of my life. That's an expression of my faith. That's an expression of the confidence that I have, that no human being has that power, that the only person that has that power is God himself. So therefore, if a person does something that seems unfair, it's temporal. You see, but God is the one who is able to balance the scales of life. And I know because I'm blessed, I'm ultimately going to get ahead in that situation. It may not be obvious, it may not be apparent, but that's my conviction and that's my belief. And what he would always do is he'd create an opportunity for your recognition. He'd create an opportunity where people really see what you bring to the table. And that then is the opportunity that you can then take advantage of such that it benefits you, or some of those benefits then begin to accrue onto you. The other point I want to talk about is this concept of value creation. See, as we talk about getting wealthy and creating wealth and getting rich in a system like this, many times people just are so focused on gaming, right? It's so focused on what games do I play? How am I strategic so I can get ahead? Again, I just want to be clear. I am not saying it's okay to get abused in situations that you're in. But what I'm saying here is this: rather than focus on playing games and trying to figure out like how I manipulate the situation, bend the situation to my will, do this and that and strategize just so I can get ahead, why don't you just focus on just creating value? See, when you create value, it doesn't really matter, right? People recognize who's creating the value. And if someone else is taking credit for the value that you're creating, it's only a matter of time. I've seen it happen way too many times. It's only a matter of time. The system eventually figures out who's creating the value, and then you be the person that they come to. It just always happens that way, right? So understand this. Jacob was able to increase Laban's wealth before he parted with Laban. And I say this to people: you want to make sure you've delivered so much valuable to the you've delivered so much value to the point that you're invaluable in that organization. Does that make sense? Because you've contributed so much, the thought of losing you then becomes a threat in your team or in that organization. You don't want to be that person who's just doing just the barest minimum, such that if you left, it's like, well, yeah, a good riddance, or yeah, I never thought he or she was going to make it anyways. You want it to be like, man, I cannot believe we lost this individual. I can't believe Moya left. Like, I mean, I'm sure we'd be fine, but gosh, that's like a big gaping hole that we're going to have to fill. You understand what that's the type of value creation mindset in that system you should have, even though it feels unfair. Even though you feel disadvantaged in that situation, you should be focused on delivering that level of value. See, because Laban prospered because of Jacob. And when that happened, as Jacob was delivering value in the context of Laban's situation or organization, Jacob's leverage within that organization was increasing. His political capital, his goodwill was increasing. And that's exactly what happens when you start delivering value. Many people go into situations like that and they still have an entitlement mindset. Now, let me tell you something. You being unfairly treated doesn't give you an entitlement to more pay. The only reason why you get more in a market situation is not you. So, because sometimes a lot of people are like, well, it's discrimination against me, so so they have to pay me more like that. Look, if you deliver value to the point where your like whatever discrimination doesn't matter, yeah, you might still be unfairly treated, but at some point in time, the system's going to realize that value that you're delivering. So you just have to keep applying yourself to grow in your skill set, to grow in your industry knowledge, to grow in your pattern recognition, to grow in the delivery of your product, to grow in the delivery of your service. How can I just always one up the average, or more than one up, like aim for the best in that particular situation, and work as hard to perform at that level of being the best. How do I do that? How do I develop the intellectual capital? How do I develop the work ethic? How do I develop the depth of insight such that I can function at a level that is just above the average in that particular situation? So that's the concept of creating value in a system like that where you feel disadvantaged, or where you feel like it's unfair to you. You can still get ahead, and that's what we're talking about here. Now, wealth accelerates when timing intersects with obedience, right? Because remember what I said a few minutes ago, that it requires faith, it requires strategy, it requires patience, it requires alignment and a sense of purpose. See, because God ultimately is the one who balances the scales of life. So what happens is that when you are following alignment with God, when you are purpose minded and you continue to deliver value, you continue to grow in your expertise, and you're just really focused on alignment in that situation, that divine opportunity, that kairos moment, that opportune moment will present itself. God's going to work that moment out for you. What you need to realize, and what a lot of people don't realize, is that sometimes when you're going through those difficult experiences where the gratification and the reward just seems so far out, it's developing character on the inside of you. Because what you don't want is wealth without character, right? Because that's ultimately going to crush you. You don't want influence without character, without ethics, right? So sometimes those experiences are shaping something on the inside of us. They're building grit. They're developing a mindset. They're developing an attitude that would ultimately help us out when we then eventually get thrust into the limelight. And a lot of times people want to short circuit that process by removing themselves from that situation and finding where it's easy and they can sort of, quote unquote, just kind of get that upside. But what you need to realize is that adversity oftentimes would build character in you. That builds a level of depth on the inside of you. So it's very, very important for you while you're in a situation like that to watch out. And by the way, just to be clear, the opportunity may not even be in that organization. The opportunity may be somewhere outside. The opportunity may not be within that current market environment that you're playing in. It may be somewhere completely different. But there is a level of expertise and skill that you get by staying there and just waiting for the timing of God, waiting for God to create that opportunity, because it may be that you remove yourself too early, you short circuit the process. But there's also the flip side, right? Which is if you stay in there longer than you should be there, it becomes a hostile environment that could ultimately take you out. And that's not what you want. So that's why sensitivity to the direction, to the leading of God is very, very important, where you're not wanting to make a move just for the sake of making a move all by itself, but you are aligned with God and you're trusting his direction, trusting his timing, so that you're sensitive on when to go launch out and do your own thing, when to pivot in your career, when to quit, when to take on that next opportunity. But you're not doing it from a place of anger. You're not doing it from a place where you just feel opportunistic. You're doing it because you have a sense of purpose and a sense of alignment, and you have the conviction on the inside of you that that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing in that particular moment, right? So if you think about life as a cycle and market as a cycle, you want to catch that wave when that a cycle is going up. That's ultimately where you want to be. Is you want that to go up, and you want to be able to catch that uptrend. But that's going to happen. That timing is going to happen because you are aligned with the divine instructions from God in that particular moment. Now, you have to remember, and I said this as an example when I was thinking about myself, is that systems may be unfair, but God is the one who ultimately balances the scales of life. And you have to believe that. You have to have a depth of conviction there that God is not an unjust God. He is not blind to your commitments, to your labor, to your plight, to what's happening. He's watching, and he's definitely going to reward you accordingly, right? Because Bible says in Hebrews 11 that he is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him and those who seek him through the equipment of faith. The hope, the conviction that he's faithful to his own character, he's faithful to his own covenant with us. And you need to understand that. And for a lot of people, what this looks like is just like office politics. It's, biased managers, it's systems that are broken, unfair policies, and so on and so forth. We recognize all these things. We see that it's happening. But again, we're still delivering value. We're still getting more experiences. We're still upskilling. We're still refining our skill set. We're still becoming more strategic. We're deepening our industry knowledge. And we're delivering above and beyond what's required of us. That's what we're doing in the midst of all of that, while in the same vein, putting our hope and our trust and our confidence in God, because we know he's ultimately the one who is going to balance the scales of life. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is that in that story, what then happens, right, is what we see is when Laban had asked Jacob, like, hey, I've realized that my success is because of you. Let me know, what is it that I can do for you? What should you get paid? And Jacob goes like, you know what? Why don't we just like divvy this stuff up, right? There's only a little bit of these sort of striped and speckled animals, and there's like the plain animals. Why don't you just like, look, anything that's plain, that's all yours. Anything that's like striped, speckled, and blighted, whatever, I'll keep those. Laban looks around and is like, you know what? Sounds like a pretty good deal to me, sure. But in the midst of that situation, God gives Jacob a unique idea, something very creative, something very innovative. That was his opportune moment, right? Such that he was able to shift the asset dynamic, the power dynamic, the incentive dynamic to his own favor, and then ultimately walked away, to the point that, when Laban's sons saw what had happened, they were like, holy crap, like, how did this happen? Everything that belonged, quote unquote, belonged to us, now you've taken that away and you're walking away with it. Well, that was the agreement that they had. It just worked out such that the agreement disproportionately paid off for Jacob. And this is where it's important, right? Is for us to focus on purpose and to focus on alignment with God, on dependency with God, and not try to short circuit the process. Understand that God himself would give you the idea in the midst of that situation. God himself will set up for you the opportunity in the midst of that situation, such that you'd come out as a person who's winning, not because you manipulated the situation yourself, but because he is the one who has led you and who has helped you to navigate it all. Well, look, I hope this was helpful. Again, my name is Moyo Mamora, and I am your host for this podcast, Momentum. And I like to share with you ideas on how you create wealth, on spirituality, and how you live purposefully. If you found this to be helpful and to be a blessing, please subscribe to my channel, drop a comment. Would love to hear your thoughts. And I would also encourage you to share this video with someone who you know or think would benefit from it. Find me on Instagram at Moyo Mamora. That's MoyoMamora. Give me a follow, drop a comment on my posts, and see you again next week.